Hey everybody, welcome back to Audi C7 owners. As usual, I'm Cameron and here to talk to you today about what I refer to as the Achilles heel of all 3.0T engines. This is something that every B8 S4, every Audi C7 owner, every SQ5 owner, anybody with this engine needs to know about, needs to understand what potential outcomes could happen when they fail, and know that these are potentially engine killers. So what is the Achilles heel of the Audi 3.0T supercharged engine? The catalytic converters. Otherwise known, some people call them the downpipes, but if you weren't aware, on these cars, and hopefully I'll have some graphics to make what I'm talking about a lot clearer for those of you that might not be familiar, but on each side you've got your exhaust manifold, and coming right off the exhaust manifold, right there are your catalytic converters. I have no idea why Audi engineers decided that the best place for these things were at the hottest point of the engine, where the heat's coming fresh out of the engine. They're right there. They're a pain in the ass to get to. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But what happens is continued exposure to that extreme heat causes catalytic converters to fail. There's some other things that make them fail faster, and we're gonna talk about what happens when you modify it and things like that. So we're gonna get into that. Before we go any further, please take a moment. If you find the videos helpful in any way, or if they've helped you accomplish a task, something, please do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, leave a comment below, especially if there's something I missed or something you want more clarity on. Definitely helps out the channel, helps out other people that are viewing it. Okay, so let's talk about this. We've talked about where the catalytic converters are. The first thing about why this is the Achilles heel of this engine is when you do need to work on them, it's a nightmare. With someone who has a lift, all the proper specialty tools, everything, if the job goes correctly, trying to remove them from the car, you're still looking at about 4 hours on each side of the engine. That's not taking into account maybe you don't have the right tools. Maybe a exhaust manifold stud breaks off when you're trying to get it. Maybe a bolt gets stripped, or the head of a nut or something, which is all very common on these. Especially northern cars have to deal with salt and rust. You're in for a whole other ordeal. Honestly, the best way to get them out if you're not trying to reuse them is to cut them out and get them out, because they're also super weirdly shaped and they're bulky. The actual canister of the catalytic converter itself is very bulky, and it makes it a nightmare to get out. There are some tricks where you can take your transmission and get a ratchet strap on it and pull it one way to create a little bit more room. There's all these little tricks like that. But if you're a person that's trying to DIY it at home, I commend you. There's, it's doable, but you're not gonna be happy about it, and you're gonna probably curse at your car a whole lot and come out with bloody hands. It's not easy. That's why there's no real good DIY video on YouTube on trying to remove them. I tried to do it, and even when I had my friend who was an Audi tech, and we had the car up on lifts, on a lift, and we were sitting there working in a full garage, we still found that on mine there was a bolt that was kind of stripped, and unless we wanted to spend all day working on getting it out, we weren't going to do it. So luckily at that point I already had gutted cats on there, and so I don't really need to mess with them at all, so I'm leaving it as is. So that's the first issue with your catalytic converters. Second issue, the location. As I kind of touched on, they're right at the hottest point of your exhaust system. It's the hottest air coming out of the engine is going straight into your catalytic converter. That alone degrades the precious metals inside faster than if the catalytic converters were further downstream on the exhaust. So that extreme heat is already going to lead to an earlier failure of those metals. And what they're going to do is they're going to kind of melt and they're going to clog. And if you've never seen the inside of a catalytic converter, it's almost like really tiny honeycomb. That's the only way I can really describe it. That allows the air to pass through, but to catch all the emission stuff that they're designed to catch. And so as it fails and those things start to melt and clog, it makes it harder for the exhaust gases to move through that catalytic converter and exit through your exhaust. So what does that mean for your engine? Well, think about it. In terms of flow, if the engine is pushing exhaust gas out and it's flowing through, everything's working great. The more obstacles you put in that way, it creates more back pressure on the engine. Now, these supercharged engines do need a certain amount of back pressure to function at their peak performance, so to speak. It's not like a turbo car where you just want free flow, no restrictions at all. They do require some back pressure. But as you build more and more back pressure, that's putting more stress on your engine because it can't get that exhaust out fast enough. And so what you're gonna see, common issues with these as your catalytic converter starts to clog, either one side or the other or both, is when you gas your car and you just give a wide open throttle, it's gonna get to a certain point and then you're gonna get an EPC light that flashes, you're gonna get a misfire, and the car will go into limp mode. And then to get out of limp mode, you just turn the car off, turn back on, and it's gonna drive as normal. That's what happened to me, and that's what I see happen on the forums all the time. And mine happened at one point, and I turned off and on, and it didn't happen again for like 6 months. Then after that, it happened like 5 months later. Then after that, it happened like 4 months later, all the way to the point where anytime I get into the throttle and get over halfway throttle, over 4,000 RPMs, EPC light, misfire, and limp mode. And I checked my spark plugs, I checked my coil packs, I was racking my brain. I was like, man, have I lost compression? Like, what's going on? And then the guys at my local shop here, Audi Motorsport, luckily the Audi tech was there and he was like, hey, let's do something. And they got it on the lift and they disconnected the exhaust at the mid pipes and they turned the car on, and on my passenger side, I had very good flow. On the driver's side, there was almost no flow at all. And that's how we determined that the catalytic converter was clogging, because all my misfires were coming from the driver's side bank. And sure enough, when they pulled it out and they looked at it, it was smooth. There was like no opening in the actual precious metal. And so somebody, not gonna name who, not gonna name names, may or may not have removed everything from inside of the catalytic converter and put it back on the car. If you do that route, we call gutted cats, make sure you reinforce all the welds, because since there's nothing in there to kind of brace the inside of that big opening, people have reported with gutted cats, if you don't reinforce the welds, that they will rupture, they will open up a little bit. So while it's out, make sure you reinforce those welds if you're gonna put it back in there. So yeah, that backs up, and what kind of damage can that do to your engine? Well, when you get so much back pressure, you're starting to back that pressure up to your exhaust manifold, and what it can do is it can damage your exhaust valve stem seals, and ultimately if you ignore it and you just keep sending it, it can grenade your engine and you can have a catastrophic failure of your engine, and then at that point it's either tear down the motor or throw in a used engine. So this is why it's at Achilles heel. If you don't fix it and if you don't correct it, you're gonna have really, really bad consequences. So what else can lead to premature failure of these? Well, one, there's certain years that tend to fail more often, and it seems like the 2012s and the 2013s had more of an issue. And speaking with some people that worked at Audi, they assumed that they just, Audi was buying catalytic converters that just weren't as high quality. But ultimately what we're finding is it doesn't matter how high quality your catalytic converters are, eventually they're gonna fail. On an OEM car that's just driven very lightly, you might be able to get years and years and years and years out of it without an issue. Now, once you start tuning your car, you're throwing more fuel, you're doing all these things that are getting more performance out of your engine, but that's also depositing more things. It's creating more temperature that's going into these catalytic converters. That's gonna add to the failure point happening earlier. Another issue, your PCV, one of the most common failures on this car, it goes bad. The biggest culprit, or symptom of a failed PCV is burning oil. And so what's happening is that oil is getting burnt and sent through your catalytic converter, and the catalytic converter is trapping all that burnt oil, and that's clogging your catalytic converter even more. And it's leading to a degradation of your catalytic converter even faster. So all these things, if you don't have like perfect maintenance, you don't know what you're doing, or you don't know what to catch, all these things can contribute to early failure of your catalytic converter. And then when it fails, if you don't catch it in time, it can literally destroy your engine. So, pain in the butt to get to, pain in the butt to remove. When it fails, it can blow up your engine. It just sucks. I honestly don't know why Audi engineered it that way. I'm sure that they had a specific reason, but I wish that they would have been located further downstream. So what are your options in terms of avoiding a catalytic converter failure and an engine failure? One, gut your cats, put them back in. Two, get test pipes from a company like Can Auto Performance, and that's just gonna be just literally a pipe that comes off your exhaust manifold and comes in there. You can also get long tube headers. They're made for this car. You have to remove the engine to put those in, but you never have to deal with it ever again. That's just another option. Those are your three options in terms of completely navigating around this issue. Excuse me. So what are some downsides to doing one of those? Well, with all of them, when you remove your catalytic converter, the sound is atrocious. These are some of the hardest engines to get to sound well with the exhaust. And when you remove that catalytic converter, it's just raspy, it sounds terrible, especially if you try and straight pipe it. It's horrendous. So that's a downside to it, so to speak. It gets really, really loud. Gutted cats tend to sound better than test pipes. Test pipes sound way raspier than gutted cats, so keep that in mind. What do you want to do if, like, let's say you don't want to deal with this, but you still want catalytic converters? Because obviously we're talking about emissions issues. So if you live in California or a county that does emissions inspections, if you got your cats or put test pipes on, you're going to have an issue, right? So you might think your only option is just to replace with OEM cats or something like that. It kind of depends on what you want to do. You know, most people, what they do is they either gut them, put test pipes on, and they put O2 spacers into those test pipes with the gutted cats to, you know, fool the computer into thinking that everything's okay. If you don't have those O2 spacers, you're likely going to get a check engine light because it's going to sense that it's missing the catalytic converter. And if you go to an inspection and they run the computer on the car, it's going to sense that, oh yeah, there's nothing there. So the O2 spacers is what most people do. 034 Motorsports is the only main tune out there that has what we call a test pipe file. And a lot of people tend to think that that means that it's like the old days, the computer tune is gonna fool the inspection computer. And you know, back in the day, you could get away with that. EPA has cracked down huge on companies doing that. It's illegal, it's a federal offense. They can get fined tens of thousands of dollars and lose their ability to operate. What the 034 test pipe file does, it only gets rid of your visible check engine light. It doesn't actually do anything in the computer in terms of the codes that are triggering this. If you go and you take your car to get an emission inspection, it's still going to fail that inspection, okay? Like I said, that's why a lot of people do the O2 spacers on there, because that will typically get you through an inspection for the most part. And you might have to play around with those spacers. Some work, some don't. So that's one thing. If you still want a catalytic converter on your car, a lot of people say just go with the Red Star test pipes with their really nice catalytic converters. They have the high flow catalytic converters. JHM makes test pipes with high flow catalytic converters on them. And I'm here to tell you they're all gonna fail. Every single one of them. You can go on to the Facebook groups and B8S4 group and the Audi C7 group, and you know, even the super expensive, really, really nice Red Star downpipes with catalytic converters, they fail after a certain amount of time, especially if you drive your car hard. So if you really want a catalytic converter because of the smell and the sound, what I would highly suggest is either go gutted cats, test pipes, and then downstream, somewhere on your mid pipes, get a set of catalytic converters welded in there as a downstream catalytic converter. They should last a very long time. They're way more accessible there. It's easier to swap in and out if you have to do so. The only downside is that, you know, if you're in an area where people are trying to steal catalytic converters for the precious metals inside, it's a lot easier to get to. That's the one, I guess, good thing about where they're located, is that someone trying to hack your catalytic converters out aren't going to be able to get to it. So yeah. So that's the Achilles heel of this engine, in my opinion. That's the biggest drawback, because it's so hard to fix, so hard to replace. It's not really a DIY job. It's expensive. Just in terms of labor, like it depends on what shop you go to, but you're looking at probably 6 to 8 hours of labor at least probably $100 an hour. And that's just to remove the catalytic converters and put them back on. So that's why it is such a pain in the butt. So yeah, I'm running gutted cats to an aftermarket exhaust. I'm happy with it. I've got O2 spacers that I need to put on there because I got the check engine light. Luckily where I live, we don't do emissions inspections, so I'm not too worried about it. But you have to do what you think you can handle in terms of your county and emissions and all that good stuff. And you might be in a different country and have even stricter stuff than we do here in the States. But yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and let me know if I missed anything when it pertains to the catalytic converters. And we'll see you guys on the next video.